All right, today I'm going to be going through a carburetor on a 1983 Yamaha Virago 500. This carburetor set is obviously off the motorcycle at this time. I've done several other videos on this motorcycle, servicing it, going through the top end, setting the valves. In this video, I'm going to go through the carburetor. I'm also going to go over a couple of the fuel lines that I've had people question me on and how they are routed. It's got some unusual direction here as far as lines and how fuel comes in and out and venting, stuff like that. So I'm just going to go over those quick before I went through this carburetor with you. Carburetors here, obviously this is the intake side, so your air filter sits here. Your motor is going to sit on the back side of this carburetor set here. We've got a fuel line here. One of these, it's a T, and I didn't put it on there very tight because this fuel line here, this vent line, actually sits clear up on both of these nipples here as well as on this. So it's a T, and there's 3 lines that this connects to. You can see there, one side's a little bit longer than the other, and that slides onto the carburetor, which would be the left-hand carburetor. Also slides onto the right-hand carburetor here, this nipple, and then it goes down onto your fuel pump that's down here. All 3 of those get attached to the motorcycle there. No fuel line clamps on this. This is an extremely tight fit. You don't need any fuel clamps on that. This hose here that sits behind this fuel pump rail here, it's gonna be a little bit hard to see this side here, but you can see kind of the same situation, but you've got a T fitting in here as opposed to a solid fuel line like that other one is. These do have the fuel hose clamps on there. So you've got this line that runs here, it tees off, runs down to the fuel pump. And I'm gonna pull that off and show you there. And then I'm gonna go ahead and pull these 2 off and show you what that looks like. There it is there. You've got 3 specialty hoses here. You wanna make sure that you use the proper ones from Yamaha, because if you take a regular fuel line and bend it like that, it's gonna kink it right there and you're gonna have some issues. So you wanna make sure you use the right one. That hose again is attached to that nipple there, that one on the right-hand carburetor, and then your fuel pump here. So those are the fuel lines. Now I'm gonna go ahead and remove your fuel pump completely off these carburetors so I can show you more in detail these carburetors and how they work. We've got 4 screws here. You can see we were missing one, but there should be 4 Phillips screws here. We've got your throttle cable that runs down through there, through that mount there, and we'll go over here to where your butterflies sit over here. Now on this side, you have your idle adjust. You turn that clockwise to turn it up, counterclockwise to turn it down. Now you wanna make sure that you set your idle when your bike is completely warmed up. You wanna make sure that your bike is to operating temperature before you go and set your idle. So I'm gonna go ahead and remove these 3 Phillips screws. Again, it should be 4 Phillips screws. Now we've got this fuel pump ready to come off here. It's gonna hit on this nipple here, so I like to remove these screws completely. And then you can work this mount out from the side there. So set that aside, that's your fuel pump. I'll be going through this in a separate video on how this works and the purpose of it. This is the Mikuni fuel pump here. And then this is the mount. You don't actually, if you were to order a rebuild kit or something, you wouldn't do anything with this mount here. It's all about these diaphragms in there. I'm gonna set that aside. Now we have our carburetors exposed here. You can see it a little bit better. Both of these carburetors down in the bowl here are gonna be identical, so I'm not gonna need to go through both of them. I'll point out a couple things along the way that you need to pay attention for. You've got 2 different jet sizes here. Again, that's for your air inlet there. Those are a certain size. You wanna make sure you have the correct size in there properly. Your manual will tell you that, or I can tell you those specs down in the comments below. These typically are not what gets plugged and damaged and destroyed. Those are typically your jets down in your bowl here that get clogged up because there's no fuel that's gonna be in this area here. It should be all clean air flowing through here, unless obviously you're running a motorcycle without an air box on it or without an air filter on it. So if that's the case, then you probably will clog those jets up there. I'll pull one of these out, just show you what that looks like there. Grab a flat screwdriver here, go ahead and remove that. You can take and tip that upside down, pull that jet out. That jet's pulled out there. Okay, I'm gonna flip this carburetor up now. Now we have 4 Phillips screws on the bottom here. If you pull this 10mm bolt here, that fuel is gonna drain out of the bottom of your carburetor. You can do that if your bike's gonna sit for the year. you can go ahead and pull this plug, drain that fuel out of there. If you got the fuel drained at this point, we'll take and remove these screws. Some people will over tighten these, making it a real big challenge to get off of there. So then at that point, you can use vice grips if you can get those on there to try to remove them. Just want to be careful going back together, you don't over tighten these. All right, we have our 4 Phillips screws there loosened up. We can take and pull those out. Now we're ready to pull this bowl off of here. Lift that up, and there's your bowl there. You want to make sure there's no dirt and debris down in there. You want to make sure that this O-ring is in good condition going back together. Make sure that there's no dirt and debris stuck to that O-ring. Make sure it's not ripped or torn in any place there. That one looks really good. We'll set that aside. Now, we've got a couple different jets here, a couple things to look out for before we go through and just start pulling stuff apart here. We've got a jet here, and you want to make sure that when you pull this jet, make sure you keep track of, because it's real similar style to this one here. You don't want to get those mixed up. And that'll be a larger orifice jet. That's going to be larger than the air intake jet there. So bigger orifice for the fuel side there. That's your main jet. That's going to be pulling fuel up into your carburetor, into your engine. So that one is what allows that fuel to go through there. Here is your float assembly. To take that off, just go ahead and pull that up just like that. There's your float. It's got a little adjustable tab here. You can adjust your needle valve that's down in here. I would suggest checking your manual. You don't want to just go pushing this up or down, whatever you feel like, because there is a correct setting to there. I can get you those specs again if you need. This fuel needle here, this needle valve can be pulled out at this time. I just use a small pair of pliers. What you can do actually is tip this carburetor upside down. That'll allow you to pull this, or it'll just drop this needle valve out of there. Nothing else is holding it in. We'll set that aside. You want to make sure that you check this for any grooving, any wear. Make sure there's nothing stuck down in there. Fuel is going to come into this carburetor here. It's going to go through this orifice here and come out of your needle valve here. So you want to make sure that that's in good condition. Next thing, we're going to pull this cap here, and that is simply what this is a cap. There will not be an orifice going through this. You want to make sure that that's in good condition. Make sure those threads are good. That's a brass fitting there. You've got a washer underneath, and I'll show you the purpose of these two parts here in a little bit. Next, we're going to go ahead and take these 2 Phillips screws out here. And this is what's a little bit unusual about these carburetors compared to others. A lot of times they don't have any other parts in here besides the jets and the jet holders and your needle, seat, and valve, and your float there. But this has got some ports that you can actually take out, you can clean, and go through on these. Get these Phillips screws removed. There's going to be one that's a little bit bigger than the other one, so keep track of where those go. Larger one's going to be on this side. This would be your intake side. You can go ahead and remove this piece here. You got to turn it to get it away from this this nipple here. Now you saw something just fall out here. That's a rubber cap. You want to make sure that you keep those handy, because you will need to put those back in when it comes time to go back together. Now in here you'll see you've got another jet. Now this determines how much fuel flows through this jet. Then it also goes through this jet here. Underneath this one, you've got your pilot jet. Clear down in here, it takes a very, very small flat screwdriver. You can take and remove that. And then I like to use a little bit bigger flat screwdriver to remove the main jet here, because if you use too small of a flat screwdriver, you're going to end up rounding off these flat screws there. So take and dump both these out now at this time. One of them just fell out. There's your pilot jet there. It's a very, very small orifice jet. You want to make sure if your bike is not starting properly, it's not idling properly, a lot of times it's going to be that pilot jet there. So make sure you inspect that. You want to be able to see through it. I've got a couple links I'll put below for rebuild kits for these motorcycles. Also a couple tools that I like to use when it comes to clean these carburetors. You've got, again, your jet here, a little bit different style, but there is going to be a size on this. There's going to be orifices all throughout this tube here. You want to make sure that those are all cleaned out and in good condition. Then take compressed air. You can blow through all these ports. Make sure that there's no gummed up fuel in these. Set that aside. Here is a Here's a diaphragm here. It also works as a seal. You want to make sure that this is in good condition. If you order a carb kit, they should come with these gaskets here. You want to make sure that if it doesn't, make sure you keep these in good condition. You don't rip or tear them. A lot of times if that carburetor's been sitting empty or even with fuel, just bad fuel in there, a lot of times those gaskets will need replaced. So keep that in mind. Now you've got your needle here, and you can kind of see that through that orifice there. The other thing you want to make sure and be careful with is this this tube here is now going to be able to fall out the other direction. Now it's not going to fall out all the way because we got your needle holding it in place, but as soon as we pull that top cap off of there, that diaphragm and that needle and that slide go up, this holder here is going to be able to drop through there. So just pay attention. There is a rubber O-ring on here. You want to make sure is in good condition. I'll show you that here when we pull this top end apart. So now we can spray through all of that with Carb&Choke cleaner and compressed air. Make sure that that's in good condition. We're going to turn this carburetor. Now we're going to pull the top cap off of this. Again, 4 Phillips screws. I'm going to try to show you this as best as I can, keeping it on its side there. Also, before we end this video, I will show you the choke assembly there, the plungers, how they work and how they function. So keep an eye out for that. Now, when I am removing these Phillips screws, I like to keep my thumb on top. I keep a little bit of pressure down on these caps because there is a spring underneath this cap here and a rubber diaphragm. What I don't want to happen is this cap to slip up and come off of here and I end up ripping that rubber diaphragm. So I like to keep my finger on top just so I can have control of it. There's the screws there that we removed. Once we get all 4 of them completely removed, we can take and lift that cap up. Again, being really careful that we don't damage or destroy that diaphragm there. We can take and pull that cap up. We've got a spring that we can take and remove. We'll set that aside. Typically, up here you don't have fuel, or you shouldn't have any fuel at all. You shouldn't also have any air coming in from the outside that hasn't been filtered. So all of this should be clean and in good condition. Now we can what I do is take my finger, push up slightly on this slide that's in here, and you can see your slide that's down in there. Also your needle that again comes right down into this tube here. You want to make sure that when you're pushing it up, make sure it's all coming out in one piece. If you do tear this diaphragm, you will want to replace it. There's no fixing, there's no using it in a rip condition. You do want to make sure that this is in really, really good condition. Now you can take and pull this slide up. Again, being careful you don't rip it. I like to be careful where I grab here. I don't just take and pull up on this diaphragm there. Now you've got your needle down right here, and you will see here, or maybe you can't see, but there should be some movement on that needle, and that's just so there's a little bit of flexibility there as far as when that slide is going up and down. You don't want it to stick in one place. Otherwise it could stick, that slide could stick and this needle sticks so that you can't, your slide won't come up. Now, before I forget, I'm going to set this diaphragm aside. We're going to go through that here in a little bit. But this tube here that your main jet assembly sat on, this tube here, if you remember, sits down like this. You've got a cap and an O-ring that sits here, and that holds that tube in. So that holds that tube that way. It holds it down, keeps pressure on it. Otherwise, it's just going to slide up just like that. Now, you can see I push that O-ring clear up, and it would be fairly easy at this point to remove this. Again, you want to be really careful when you're dealing with these because you're dealing with rubber parts here. You don't want to damage them, and you're dealing with a brass fitting that I don't want to have to replace. A lot of these parts are obsolete, which is why doing a carb clean on these is so crucial as opposed to getting an aftermarket or a knockoff carburetor. So you can take and pull these up, and that is what it looks like there. You've got a groove there. I'll show you when we're going back together why that groove is there, but that O-ring sits right on there, and we'll keep things sealed up. So we'll take and slide that back through very carefully again. I'm going to slide this O-ring back on there. I'm going to set this carburetor aside for now while I pull this needle off of this slide and show you this diaphragm. Now we're going to take a larger screwdriver here, unscrew this. Now these are a little bit of a challenge. They are spring loaded. I showed you how that needle sprung up and down a little bit. So you just got to be careful when you're going back together with these or even pulling them apart. You don't lose any parts there. There's your plastic cap. Now you've got a spring that sits down in there, and then you have a needle. Now you also have a washer that sits on that needle. You want to make sure that that stays in position there. you've got a plastic piece there, and then you've got a clip. A lot of times on some carburetors, these clips are adjustable, so you can adjust your needle up and down if need be. These carburetors here are actually a certain size. You want to make sure that you know what size you need. If you're ordering a jet kit or you're ordering specific parts, you want to make sure you get the right size. You've got this plastic fitting here with a little plastic tab on there. You want to keep track of where that tab is going when you're going back together. Now to go back together, once that clip is on there properly, once this plastic tab is on there properly, slide it back down into the center of this slide here, and there is a little groove in this slide for that tab to sit. You can take and spin this needle and get that to the correct position. Take this washer here, and they're a little bit of a challenge to get back on because they are so tiny. Take and set that down, make sure it sits over top of that needle. Take this spring here, set it down in there. Now that's going to hold that washer in place and that needle in place. Now we're going to take this cap here, plastic cap, and because there's some tension on there, what I do is very carefully we'll hold that cap into place, and then I'll just take and spin that slide till it gets started there. Once you get started, you can use a screwdriver, and you want to make sure everything is seated properly, because if that spring is not in the correct position there, or that needle slid out of place, you're not going to be able to push that needle up and down like that, and you have to have that needle going up and down like that. So make sure it does that before you start going back together. We've got another jet up top here, and this is, again, for airflow, not regarding fuel. We can take and pull this out. You still want to make sure it's in clean and good condition. You want to make sure that you don't get it mixed up with these other two jets. You can take then Carb&Choke cleaner, compressed air, blow this all out. If you've ordered a jet kit, again, I'll put a link to that in the comments below. If you've ordered a jet kit, a lot of times these jets will come with it. Again, make sure that you pay attention to which jets come out of where and which jets go back together in what position, because you do not want to restrict airflow or fuel flow when this motorcycle is running. Problem with twin cylinders or four cylinders or an inline four is a motorcycle will a lot of times run fairly decent, even if one carburetor is running extremely rich or extremely lean. So you could be burning up a cylinder all because you put in the incorrect jet sizes and weren't paying attention on how to go back together, and you won't even know it until it's too far gone. So it's crucial to put those jets in the right position. It's crucial to know what you're doing before you go through and rebuild a carburetor. That's exactly why I like to go through and show you every step of the way so that you know how to properly clean your carburetors. The other thing is, I don't want to tell you what jet sizes specifically to use, because different altitude, different riding conditions, different performance parts done to the bike is a completely different jet size. And I want you to do your own research as far as what kind of exhaust, what kind of intake, what kind of altitude you're going to be riding in, and you need to make those own decisions for your own motorcycle. Be careful going back. You've got an O-ring here. You want to make sure that that's in the correct position there. Down in here, you've got your air fuel screw. And the way that you determine that in your manual, again, same thing, different riding conditions, altitude, stuff like that, it's going to change the setting on this. But you take a flat screwdriver, the way to determine where you're at as far as air fuel screw, as far as your number of screws out is, you screw it all the way in, and then the number of screws out that you're supposed to do, your manual will tell you. Typically, they're in that 2 to 2.5 range, but there could be anywhere from 1.5 to 3. So again, determine that on your own as far as your what your manual says, what your local dealership says. That's going to be on the top of your carburetor here, and you're going to be able to adjust those separately. So screw those in. Okay, we're 2 turns out, or 2 turns in is what we need to do. So to turn it back to the correct position there, we'll go back and turn it 2 turns out. Half, 1.5, 2. Now we're at 2 turns out. That's exactly where we're supposed to be for this riding condition and altitude. Again, that could be different for you. Going back together, then what I like to do is take our diaphragm, turn it over just like that. Make sure that this is, again, in good condition. Make sure there's no rips or tears. You've got a little rubber tab here that's going to sit in that position there. Take and slide your slide down. A lot of times you got to take 2 fingers here. Make sure your needle goes into the correct position there. Make sure it slides down properly there. And then what I do then is take my finger here and slide that into place because there's a little bit of a groove here. You can see that on our cap, there's a groove there. You wanna make sure that that's slid properly into place so that it seals up nicely. So what I do then is take my finger, slide it underneath of, take my middle finger, my index finger here, slide it underneath so our slide doesn't go all the way down. If it does, it's gonna do that. It's gonna pull that diaphragm up. It's gonna be a lot harder to get that to seal properly. So what I do is I'll fold that down. I'll take my finger here, hold it into place so it holds it up so I've got a little bit of slack here. Put this down into place here. And then as soon as we get it into place here, I take my spring, and I'm having to hold a little bit on that tab there until we get it into place. Make sure that this port here sits on that rubber O-ring there. So it's going to be turned like this. You got your intake air box on this side, you got your engine on this side. Your tab on your cap is going to be towards your engine. Take and slide that spring onto that post there. Take and slide, still keeping your finger underneath your slide there, and then take and set that down. And then a lot of times you can feel it set into place there if you've got it in the correct position. Everything lines up the way that it should. Don't forget your cable mount there. That's going to go on. I like to get at least 3 screws in before I let my finger off of the slide or before I take my finger off of that cap there. All right, once we get these all tightened up, you can take your finger over top there. Now, when you take compressed air, you should be able to blow through this port here. That slide should go up, and then it should come down freely, just like that. If it comes up and it gets stuck halfway or something, then you want to make sure that you go through and make sure that you did that whole process right, taking everything back apart, make sure it slides up and down freely. You want to make sure that it does that. Otherwise, when you're going down the road or you're coming up to a stop sign, you let off the throttle. If that slide stays up, your motorcycle is going to continue to go. It's going to continue to allow fuel to go through there, and you're going to have some issues. So putting our air screw back in. Again, it's the smaller of the 2 orifices here. So if you could see that there, this one's got a much smaller orifice. I'm going to slide that into place there, take a screwdriver and snug this up. Again, brass jets, they don't have to be extremely tight. Just snug them up. Now I'm going to take and I'm going to put our pilot jet down all the way down in there. We're going to take our main jet there, slide that into place, take our screwdriver, tighten this up, tighten our pilot jet up. Again, I use a smaller screwdriver on the pilot jet than I do on the main one because I did not want to round that off. Once we get that snugged up there, now we can take our rubber caps, put those in position there. You can see one orifice here has got a brass fitting. Looks like a brass fitting down in here. I think that's pressed in. That doesn't come out. And you want to make sure that your rubber plugs are not on that port there, but on your main jet there and your pilot jet. Slide those in position there. We've got our main jet. That'll sit here. Go in. We could tighten this up after we get this on the motorcycle, or once we get this on the carburetor, but I just did it now. Now flip this carburetor up, and then before we put this assembly back on there, take our diaphragm here, our gasket there, slide that into place. Make sure it's down all the way. Make sure nothing's holding it up. Make sure there's no dirt and debris down in there. Now take your finger, and I like to hold on this tube here because I told you that groove that's on this tube here and that tab here need to line up. So start that in position, slide that down, make sure that that tab slides down into that tube there. And we can take our cap and our gasket there, or excuse me, our cap and our washer there. And I might have to take and push with my finger down to get that tube up high enough to grab a hold of this cap. So take and screw that on, snug this up. Okay, the cap is tightened up here. Now that just kind of holds it into place there. What you're gonna do now is take your 2 Phillips screws there. Again, one's longer, one's shorter. Longer one goes to the airbox side, shorter one to the intake. Take and snug these up. That's gonna hold this into place a little bit better. It's actually going to use that gasket that I showed you there. It's going to seal it up because of these screws here. Simply putting this cap in there is not going to seal that gasket up like it should. So snug these up. They don't have to be overly tight. As soon as those are tightened up, take your needle, put that back into place there. You've got your float here. Slide that down. Make sure that that tab on your needle sits on that tab on your float there in the correct position there, so that fuel will shut off properly. Then inspect your O-ring here again, make sure that that's in good condition. Okay, down through your drain bolt here, you can see your main jet. Now I'm not totally sure, you could actually take and pull that main jet out this way. Getting it back in there is going to be extremely tricky because there's actually room in this bowl here for that main jet to fall either direction. It'd be just really hard to get that straight and lined up. So it's not that hard just to go ahead and pull these 4 Phillips screws there if you're trying to replace that main jet, but you can get to there and remove it with this cap off. 10 millimeters, snug that up. You've got an O-ring that sits on the bottom of this cap. Make sure that that's in good condition. This is the engine side again, but I just want to show you this. You've got your throttle cable that comes down here. When you twist that throttle, these butterflies open. Again, this is engine side, so as soon as that happens, your slides that are on the other side of these butterflies are going to go up. Air is going to go through because your throttle is open, because these butterflies are opening up. That's going to suck your slide up. That's going to open your needle up. That's going to allow fuel to flow through your main jet as fast as that main jet allows. That's going to bring that fuel up through that orifice there that that our needle sits down into. That's going to push that fuel, that air is going to push that fuel down into that engine, and that is how your motorcycle fires. So this adjustment here, you will be able to adjust your carburetors differently as far as when that throttle opens up. If you turn this screw, that'll change your butterflies slightly when those open and shut. So you can do that with that screw there if they are not in sync. That is how you would adjust those. Okay, I told you I'd show you the choke assembly here. Each carburetor has its own plunger there. It's got a plunger and a spring in here. When you're at your handlebars there and you pull that lever to choke your motorcycle, that's going to lift up these plungers here. Cable that runs through this line here, it's going to go over here, and when you pull that lever, it's going to lift up on these 2 plungers here. That's going to lift that plunger up, and it's going to allow fuel and air to go into that motor quicker than if it would if that choke was shut off. So if the choke shut off, it's going to go back down like that. You can remove these. There is 2 Phillips screws here that you can move this lever or pull this lever off. You can then use a 12 millimeter, remove that cap right there. You're going to be able to pull your plunger out just like that. This choke assembly is in good condition on this one, so there's no need for me to do that. Okay, that is the carb clean on a Yamaha Virago 500. This is the V-twin motor. If you've got questions, make sure you leave those in the comments below. If this video has been helpful, make sure you like, subscribe, and share so that others can find help with their Yamaha motorcycles as well. We've got our fuel pump here that we're going to go through, so I'm going to leave that off the carburetor at this time. I'm going to show you how that works, and then I've already showed you these fuel lines here. I'll make sure you install those properly. So if you've got questions, again, make sure and leave those in the comments below. Appreciate you guys watching.